Hello.
Hello, good morning. Oops,
Good morning.
Morning.
how are you guys doing?
Good. I'm making breakfast.
Let me just take attendance real quick here. Kira's here. Natalie's here. Aiden's here. Andrew's here. Melissa's here. And Rissa is not here. All right. Good morning. All right, so we can go ahead and get started. I'm going to move this over. Let's see here. Share my screen. Got too much stuff going on over here. Can everyone see my Moodle screen right now? Yep, great. So I do want to point out, I have added a quiz for the brain chapter. My initial plan was for it to be on the writing spiral and the brain, but once I started making it, I totally forgot about the writing spiral, so you guys got off easy with that, I guess. So it's just going to be over the brain this week. It will be due by the start of class on Thursday, so you have all of today, all of tomorrow, and then until 9:30 a.m. to get that finished on Thursday. 15 minutes to start the quiz once you start it, or 15 minutes to complete the quiz once you start it. And it's just over the material that we've covered about the brain. So parts of the neuron, how neurons function, neurotransmitters. Yeah, I can't remember, but I don't think there are endocrine system questions on there. Oh, neuroimaging, so MRI, fMRI, that kind of stuff's on there too. Any questions about the quiz? So we do have the lectures are up here for last week as well. This week we're going to talk about research methods. I currently do not have an article picked out for you all to read for Thursday, so maybe we skip it and we'll just cover research methods today and Thursday. And then our next exam is basically the next thing that we have. So our first exam will cover that introduction chapter, chapter 1, history, the biological basis of behavior. So that's the brain and the neuron. And then research methods, which we will talk about today. I'm currently planning on, let me pull up my calendar here. So we would talk about, can you guys see my calendar? I don't know if you can see that or not. Yeah, okay, so today's the 15th, and then we would finish talking about research methods on the 17th. I have a doctor's appointment on the 29th, so I think that would be a fantastic date for your test, because I'm not gonna be able to be in class anyway. So I'll just put the exam on Moodle. So that'll give you a full week to study. We will go ahead and start covering classical conditioning next week, but the exam would be on the 29th. I think that works out for my schedule, and it gives you a little bit of time to sit with the material and to research, to study over that. So it is those 3 chapters, chapter 1, chapter 2, and then the brain and the neuron. Any questions about that? And right now I'm thinking the test will just be about 50 multiple choice questions. There might be some matching in there. In the brain quiz, there's some matching in there for sure. So I might do something similar for the exam as well.
Will the exam be open note?
So not technically, but I mean, if it's on Moodle and I'm not watching you do it, then, you know, you'll have a limited amount of time to answer those questions. So that's kind of up to you how you devote your resources, right? If you want to sit there and look up the answers to everything, I'm not technically allowing that, but I also realize that I don't have a lot of control over it.
Okay.
And it will be time limited, so make sure you watch your time. while you do that. Do you guys want a study guide for the exam? It's just 2 chapters in the brain.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I got to create the exam before I make the study guide, I guess. That helps. Yeah, so major terms, that we've talked about throughout chapter 1 and the brain chapter, and then today we'll talk about some major terms as well. And then just understanding how these work. So today we're going to, talk about research methods and understanding how some of these methods would play out will be really important, right? So being able to apply that, that information. Did you all, I have gone through this weekend. I went through the chapter 1 quiz and scored everyone's assignments or everyone's quizzes. So if you haven't taken a look at my notes for you there, go ahead and do that, see what I've scored, so you can get an idea. The one thing I do want you to note, so I included that Dr. D question, right? The one that says, I'm a natural born introvert. Is this really the case? There are a variety of answers to that, and that's completely fair. I was looking for something that indicated to me that you all could connect the chapter material with, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen, the chapter material with some practical applications of that material, right? So most people said something like, no, this is not the case, you can change it, you need to spend more time with friends and being rewarded for your conversations in that way. And that's kind of the what I was looking for. But in particular, I needed to see something like observational learning or some sort of reward for that activity, right? So make sure that so there will be more of those types of questions in the future. Your book actually has some in each chapter, I believe. They go through a Dr. D, let's see if I can find one. Yeah. So for chapter 1, there is one on page 35. For chapter 2, let's see where it is. Towards the end. There's one on page 80. So those that are in the book, they give you the question and then they give you an example of an answer. Take a look at those because that's really the type of information that I'm looking for from you all when I pose those questions, right? Make sure that you can use those terms that are in the book that we're talking about and connect these questions to the material in a very practical way. So definitely have a look at those. So page 80 is the one for chapter 2. And then some of you just didn't give me enough information on that question, and so I couldn't give you full credit for it. Any questions on that? All right. Let me see what's going on here. That's fine. All right. So chapter 2 is research methods for learning and behavior. All right. So just remember to finish this brain quiz before class on Thursday. Has anyone started it, taken it already? Anyone else besides Aiden?
No, I haven't yet. I'll do it before Thursday.
No problem. What do you think, Aiden? Was it pretty straightforward? Was it tricky?
No, I thought it was pretty straightforward. It wasn't too bad.
Okay, good to know. I didn't try to make it, I tried to follow our notes pretty well in that material. What the heck is this? Okay. All right, so chapter 2 does talk about research methods, and the chapter starts off very simple, right? So identifying what a variable is, or an independent variable and a dependent variable. These should be a review for you guys. I'm sure you all have seen IVs and DVs in most of your scientific classes. Yeah, all of your scientific classes, I would imagine. So that should be pretty straightforward for you. But then it does get into more specific research methods that we can use. So different types of research that we can use in learning experiments. So to tell if someone has learned something or changed their behavior in some way. So I just want to sit here and talk about these for a minute. So a variable, right, is just something that changes. So it can change person, place, or thing, changes from over time or from one situation to another. Right? So if something is variable, it changes, right? That is the definition of what a variable is. In particular, we have an independent variable is what we are going to manipulate as an experimenter, and the dependent variable is what we're going to measure. So, let's see. Q and Aiden are very familiar with the dog research program that I'm involved in. Still doing that this semester. So, and in this program, we are creating a behavioral program for shelter dogs to change some of their less desirable behaviors, so that with the end goal that they are adopted, right? So dogs come into the shelter and sometimes they're mistreated, whatever, and they just don't behave in a way that is going to get them adopted, right? And so if we can change these behaviors quickly without much difficulty and get the dogs adopted, that's better for everyone. It's better for the dog, it's better for the shelter, it's better for the people who adopt the dog. So what we have done, what we have changed in that situation is this behavioral program, right? So this learning environment. And in particular, there's like 4 behaviors that we're looking at. So jumping mouthy, so when you approach a dog, does it jump at you and kind of like bite at your arm or something, right? When it meets you. That's not something that a lot of people want, especially if it's a large dog, right? You can't have a large dog jumping on strangers all the time. One of them is leash reactivity. So if we're walking a dog, does it like try to, when it sees another dog like across the street or a person across the street, does it pull on its leash and try to lunge at that other animal or run towards that other animal, right? That's another of the behaviors that we're trying to change. Barrier reactivity. So if it's in a cage or in a fence or something, and you walk up to the fence, we don't want it to like constantly jump at the fence, bark at that person, although some people might want that. But in general, we don't want that to happen. So that's another one of the behaviors. What's the other one? Oh crap, guys, I can't remember the 4th one we're looking at. Not that it matters, but I feel like I should know it. Anyway, jumping mouthy. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Anyway, we're trying to change these behaviors, right? We've got this behavioral program going so we can train the dogs not to do those things. And then we're going to measure their behavior in different situations at baseline, 30, 60, and 90 days. So at those time points, we assess their behavior, right? And we're just going to measure, do we see those behaviors? And hopefully, right? So initially at that baseline, we would see those behaviors, and then over time, by the 90 days, hopefully we will not see those behaviors, or we will see a drastic reduction in those behaviors in the animals. So that's what we're measuring, right? Those behaviors. And then our independent variable in that study is the behavioral program that we're implementing. So that's, more detail than you probably need, right? An independent variable is what we're manipulating in an experiment, and a dependent variable is what we're measuring in an experiment. And these are abbreviated IV and DV frequently. A functional relationship is just one that indicates a change between that independent variable and dependent variable. So if, if when the trainer is in place, we don't see that behavior. But if when a stranger is in place, we do see that behavior, right? So now we've got a change between what we have manipulated and the behavior that we see. So that's a functional relationship. It just indicates that there is a change between the independent variable and the dependent variable. That's all that really means, is a functional relationship. Now, if we had some manipulation and it didn't produce a change in behavior, then we would not say that that's a functional relationship, right? Because there's not a change in the independent variable and the dependent variable. Everyone good here? Okay. Oh my God, there's so many bugs in my house right now. Sorry, it's like flying around. Okay, so a stimulus, right, is anything that can influence behavior. So a stimulus might be the smell of chocolate chip cookies, right? That's going to influence my walking to the kitchen behavior. If I smell cookies, I'm going to change my behavior and try to obtain those cookies. I love cookies. If, I don't know, you hear a siren, right, as you're driving, that's going to change your behavior, and hopefully you pull over to the side of the road to let that emergency vehicle pass, right? So that anything can really be a stimulus. But in particular, we have two different types of stimuli. So stimuli is plural for stimulus. So an appetitive stimulus, something that organism's going to seek out. So this could be food, shelter, it could be, I don't know, whatever, right? Water, good grades, something that an organism will go after. And an aversive stimulus is something that an organism wants to avoid. So bad grades, electric shocks, homelessness, losing a job, right? These are things that a person or an organism would want to try to avoid. So, going to prison or jail, most people want to avoid that. So they're going to avoid acting in a particular way that would cause them to do that. So it really could be just about anything. If we're seeking it out, it's going to be appetitive, and if we're avoiding it, it's going to be aversive. And then that response is just that behavior that we perform, right? So stimulus response. We have a stimulus and then we have a response to that thing, right? The stimulus was the smell of chocolate chip cookies, and my response was going to the kitchen, and that smell of chocolate chip cookies in this instance for me was appetitive, right? I sought it out. I went to go find those cookies. And then we just have different types of behavior, overt or covert behavior. Overt, something we can observe, so observable, overt, right, O and O. And then covert, it's, like a spy, right, a covert operation. So you can't really see what's going on. Only the person performing the behavior can perceive it. So maybe that's, the feeling of hunger or embarrassment or something like that, right? We can change those behaviors, but maybe only internal behaviors or thought patterns. So something that you're not observing from the outside, it's going to be a covert behavior. Let's see. It is important to know that some behaviors could be a mix of overt and covert behaviors. When we're doing our research studies, we do prefer these overt behaviors. They're much easier to measure, right? If we can't observe that behavior, it's going to be challenging for us to measure it. So you might think heart rate, right, isn't really something that you can, on the surface, without specific tools, observe, right? Someone's heart rate may increase. But if I can connect you to a heart rate monitor and then have you perform that task, that does become an overt behavior, and now I can monitor that. So if we can change a covert behavior to an overt behavior, something that we can observe, then it becomes much more useful for us from an experimental standpoint. So some behaviors can have both components, right? Overt and covert components to them. Just real quick, going back, oops, that's not one, it's on the same flipping slide. Going back to aversive and appetitive stimulus, this can differ by the person, right? So someone who, I don't know, someone who loves black licorice, right? That's going to be an appetitive stimulus for them. But if someone hates black licorice, then that would be an aversive stimulus. They do not want that, they will avoid it. So these can vary by person. It's not just that all food is appetitive and all shocks are aversive. Sometimes shocks could make you feel better. So there are some instances where electric shocks are used in depression, right? To help alleviate some symptoms of depression or even pain, right? If they're mild electric shocks, that might be something that someone seeks out. So it definitely depends on the person, the situation, and the intensity of these stimuli as well. It's not just a clear cut, this type of stimulus is appetitive and this is aversive. And it's totally going to depend on the situation as well, right? So if I've just eaten a whole sleeve of cookies and I smell some chocolate chip cookies, I don't want those, right? Even though I love chocolate chip cookies, that's not going to be appetitive to me. All right. Okay, so we can talk about motivating operations. So what motivates people, right? We have to, or motivates these behaviors. So if something increases, right, the appetitive or aversiveness of an event, that's an establishing operation. So if I am deprived of food for 12 hours, and then I smell some food, that's going to be an establishing operation, right? Especially as an establishing operation for me to eat. It's going to increase the likelihood that I eat, right? That behavior is me eating in response to food. Likewise, if I gouge myself on a bunch of food, that may increase the aversiveness of that food for me, right? So again, that's going to be an establishing operation. It's increasing the appetitiveness or aversiveness of an event. We're establishing that behavior. If we decrease the appetitiveness or aversiveness of an event, that's going to be an abolishing operation. And again, this does depend on the situation. So maybe you spend some time away from television, that's one of the examples in your book. You're spending time away from television, and then when you go back to that television, you might not really care about it. So that could have decreased the appetitiveness of watching television. right? So spending time away from it. Not necessarily, again, it's going to depend on the person, the situation, etc. So the other example, another example your book gives is hearing your favorite song too often. If you hear one particular song on repeat, you might get tired of it, and then you no longer seek out listening to that song. Maybe, right? Not necessarily. So here's a discussion question, and I want to see what you guys think about this. So in what ways is anorexia nervosa an exception to motivating operations? So let's just start with what is anorexia nervosa?
Isn't it basically where you like starve yourself because you look at yourself and you don't see what you like, and so your brain is cognitively telling you like, hey, maybe we should not eat this, or maybe we should, yeah, that's
Yep, that's right. So it's going to be food restriction, right? And it usually is driven in part, at least, by some skewed body image, right? There's also some other factors in there like control that can be linked to anorexia as well. So if you're a very anxious person and you can't control a lot of things in your life, this is something that people can control. So that's often also associated with anorexia. It's not always body image issues, but that is one driving factor for sure. So in what ways is anorexia an exception to this motivating operation? So what happens in anorexia? You starve yourself, right? So how is this an exception? What happens normally when you don't have food?
When you normally don't have food, you usually, or you'll get hungry, or you'll usually go eat, or I guess your mood changes, depends. But where with anorexia, if you don't, you feel more good about yourself.
Yeah,
So it kind of works the opposite way.
that's right. So under normal circumstances, right, the lack of food is going to increase that appetitiveness of food, right? You don't eat, and then you're going to go and seek out that food, that eating behavior. With anorexia nervosa, right, you don't eat, and then you don't seek out food, right? Those cues aren't there for you to do that. Okay. I want to spend a little bit of time here just because these two words often get confused. So here we're going to talk about contiguity and contingency. We talked briefly about contiguity in the first chapter. I'm not sure we talked about contingency. So contiguity, your book outlines two specific types of contiguity. So temporal contiguity occurring in time, right? Temporal is time. And spatial, so things that are near each other in location. So this is going to be the thunder lightning example, right? So you see lightning, and then a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds later, you hear thunder. So those two things, right, occur close to each other in time. Yeah, so contiguity is just closeness or nearness. So it could occur in time or in physical proximity or location, right, space. The example your book gives, which I particularly like, for space, is a child realizing that a knock at the door, so a knock indicates that someone might be at the front door, right? So that sound is very closely related to the location of a visitor, right? So where that person might be approaching your house. Whereas the doorbell ringing, often a doorbell, the sound box for that is not usually located very close to the front door where a visitor might come from. So though the doorbell and the front door are going to lack that spatial contiguity, even if they do still have that temporal contiguity, right? Someone arrives and then they ring your doorbell. And then you go and open the door and you have a visitor, right? So temporally, they are contiguous, but spatially, it's harder for a young child to put that together, right? Because spatially, they are not near each other. So the doorbell rings, it's in a different location than that visitor. But with a knock on the door, that sound is very close to where that visitor is. Right, and then contingency, so even though these words look alike, they are different, right? Contingency means that one thing happens because of the other, right? So a functional relationship, right? That we talked about functional relationships on one of those early slides, one of the first slides here. So the independent variable causes a change in the dependent variable. That's going to be a contingent relationship. Yeah. Let's see if they have a good example. I don't remember what the example was in the book. Oh, so like pressing a lever to receive food. So if a rat is in a cage or a bird is in a cage and it presses a lever, then it receives food, right? So that food is contingent upon the lever press. The animal is not going to receive food unless it presses the lever. So just like we talked about with Skinner boxes, let's get it back in here. We talked about with Thorndike's puzzle boxes, right? The animal wasn't able to escape the box unless it figured out the puzzle, right? So its escape and ultimately access to food was contingent upon it doing the right sequence of behavior to get out of the box, right? So it's predictive, it's a function of. So are there confusions between contiguity and contingency? Have you heard these terms before? Yeah? Is this all a review for you, Aiden? Good. I can't see anyone else's face, so you're the only one that I can. Sorry.
My computer doesn't have a camera, I'm sorry.
No, not a problem, not a problem. Thanks, Q, I appreciate it. Is it a review for you too? Good, great, all right. So contiguity, located near each other, either spatially or in time. And then contingency is a function of, right? One thing predicts the other thing, cause and effect type situation. Okay, the next section in the chapter, how are we on time? Well, we're way good. Okay, okay, yep. So the next section in your book talks about how we measure behavior. So what are the behaviors that we're looking for, right? That target behavior. We need to make sure that we define our behaviors, right? So that they're unambiguous. So this is going to be creating your operational definitions. So I'm gonna keep referencing my dog study. In that study, we're looking for very particular behaviors. We have what is known as a behavioral ethogram. So this very specifically lines out the behaviors that we're looking for. And I'm gonna continue referencing how this study is set up as we move through these measurements of behavior, because it's a really good example of these measures. So you're going to learn more about this study, whether you want to or not. Right. So we need to define our behavior, and then we're going to have to measure it or record it in some way. right? In our dog study, we're using videos. We have video clips of, I'll just show you guys. Okay, you guys see this Dropbox here? All these videos.
I can't see it.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Well, for some reason it stopped sharing. How about now?
Yeah, I can see it now.
Okay. Let's see what's in this one. So these are our videos that we have taken. I'm trying to just figure out what we're doing and what works the best for these particular behaviors that we're interested in. I wish I knew which one was really good. More than likely you're going to hear dogs barking, so I'm just going to give you guys that heads up. Right, so this is one of our leash reactivity videos. We record the video of a dog walking on a leash. So I don't think that this one, no, this one isn't that great. Right, we're reinforcing that behavior that we want, which is not lunging or pulling towards another animal. Right, so that's one of them that we're looking at. The way that, so I think these are videos that we've decided not to use, but the way that we have it set up, let's try this one. No, not that one. Is ideally that the animal will walk past another animal and see what happens. Do they lunge, do they bark, etc. No, I don't think that one does anything either. All right, let's see if I can find a good one for you. So this is a barrier reactivity. Oh, stranger barrier reactivity. So that's a behavior that we don't want to occur. So ideally the dog would not bark at a stranger. Right, and also would not jump up on the cage.
Would it be a different situation if the dog was adopted and then they barked at strangers because like it wasn't their owner at that point?
So that's something that
At
we
all.
have to test. I wanted to show one more video here. So we are doing these videos with the trainers and then with strangers as well. So we want that behavior to generalize to strangers as well and in different environments, ideally. But as you mentioned, right, that could be challenging. And if someone adopts these animals and they stay inside, you know, or in a very small area and never see strangers, well, then we might see that behavior re-emerge when they see a stranger, you know, a year later or something.
Okay.
This is Stitch. I think he's adorable. Right, this is what we want. And then not. Okay, so you guys get the idea. Stitch was actually recently adopted, so we're very excited about that. So, we have an ethogram, right? So very specific behaviors. I don't know if I can find that. We'll show you guys that as well. It's okay. I don't know where it is, so I'll have to keep looking for it, and I'll find it for you guys just to share so you guys can get an idea of what that would look like. But it outlines all of these behaviors. So what does lunging mean? What does pawing mean? What does barking mean? And I know that seems, okay, everyone knows what it sounds like when a dog barks, but, could a low growl sometimes be mistaken for a bark, right? We don't want that mistake to occur in our data. So we have to very clearly define it. And then in our study, we're recording it using videos, but that's not the only way to record behavior. So it's just one way. All right, what else do we need to talk about with this? Okay, so how do we record behavior? What are we looking at? So one thing that we could look at is the rate of a response or the rate of a behavior. So how often does this behavior occur? We'll give a very, and you always want to give a very specific time period when we talk about rate of behavior. So the dog bark, so all of our dog videos, they're set to be 30 seconds long. So that's our, we had 5 barks in 30 seconds, right? Or something like that. That would be our rate of that behavior in that time. So you have to give a time period. So just saying 5 barks doesn't give us doesn't give us enough information. We need to know, in what time period did we see that? That gives us a significantly more useful information. Because it could be, 5 barks in an hour, 5 barks in a day, whatever, if we don't provide that time period. So we have to include some sort of time aspect. So number of lever presses for food per hour. Let's see, we talked about, Brittany, in drugs class, we talked about animals seeking out drugs, right? So, a rat might press a lever over and over and over again if it is somehow stimulating dopamine, right? Or these feel-good chemicals, right? So cocaine or heroin, right? That animal will continue to press that lever to get that response. But we need to know the rate. So how often and so how many times in a particular time period. Okay. One way that we can do that is using a cumulative recorder. So this is like an automatic way of recording rates of behavior. So a flat line indicates no responding, and then as it increases in slope, we have more responding, right? So this small slope indicates slow responding, a slow rate of response, whereas a very steep slope indicates a more rapid response, or button press or something like that. And these little tick marks are our reinforcers, which we'll talk about later. So that's one way that we can record measurement, right? So using something like a cumulative recorder. We can also talk about intensity of a behavior. So how intense is that behavior? How strong is that behavior? Is it, someone, maybe you approach a desk and it's got one of those bells, like ring for service. So you ring it, and nothing. Well, I guess this is more like a rate, actually. How can I? So intensity is just going to be like how strong. So do you press it harder, the button, or do you not press it as hard? So the bell response I was thinking is really a rate. Do you like ring it once or ring it, ding, 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 come flip and help me. That's more of a rate response. Intensity is going to be how strong. So the example in the book is the amount of saliva. How strongly are they salivating, right? What's that look like? You can measure that output. It's going to be an overt behavior, very observable. That's what we want. Makes experimenting significantly easier if we can observe it. So collecting that saliva from Pavlov's dog indicates the intensity with which they expect that food. Okay, not listed here, but your book talks about is duration. So duration is how long a behavior lasts. So, you know, if I tell you to go out and run, well, how long did you run for, right? I ran for 5 minutes, I ran for 10 minutes, I ran for 30 minutes, whatever, right? How long did that behavior last? We can also talk about speed. So this is different from duration. So you could run for 30 minutes, but not make it very far. Or you could run very quickly and make it quite far in 30 minutes. So speed has, you know, how long does it take for you to start and finish something? So how long does it take for you to run 1 mile, right? That's going to be different than a duration. How long did you run? So how long does it take for this mouse to find its food in these various mazes, something like that. And then latency is how long it takes for that behavior to begin. So is this something that you put off? Is this something that maybe you don't need right away and so you don't start for a while? Is it something that you're very eager for and you want to start right away? So how long until you start studying? Well, you may procrastinate and put that off for a while. We can measure that latency. So these three, the duration, speed, and latency, are often confused with one another. Make sure that you spend a little time just trying to get those sorted out in your head. Duration is going to be that total length of time. Whereas speed is, you know, how quickly something happens from start to finish. And then latency is the amount of time it takes before that behavior is displayed. So we're all measuring, so in all three of those, we are measuring time. And then your book, the paragraph just before interval recording on page 62 goes through a little paragraph explaining the difference between those three, the duration, latency, and speed. So I would have a look at that. All right. There are different ways that we can sample our measurements. So here are, the first two are very similar to one another. And the third one really has to do with a physical form of behavior. So interval recording has to do with continuous intervals. So in our dog videos, what we are doing, we're taking those 30-second videos, and for every 5 seconds, we're coding, does this behavior occur in this 5-second interval? It's just a yes or no question, right? Do we see barking in this first 5 seconds? Do we see barking in the second 5 seconds? Do we see barking in the third 5 seconds, right? Continuous intervals for that entire 30-second sample. So that's going to be interval recording. Time sample recording is different in that these are discontinuous intervals. So it would be something like, do we see barking in the first 5 seconds? Do we see barking in the fifth 5 seconds, right? So not, we're not looking at every single interval. We're just picking and choosing certain times to sample from that recording, or from that video. So the example here, right, the first 10 minutes at the start of each half hour might be how we record that. So, you know, if, I don't know, do y'all have like teacher observations in high school or something where a principal or someone would come into the class and sit in the class and observe the teacher, something like that, right? That's going to be something like a time sample recording. So they may come, you know, at the beginning of the semester every year, or in the middle of the semester every year. That's going to be like a time sample recording. We set up very specific intervals and then we sample those, but they're not going to be continuous intervals for the whole process. So there's just no way that someone could come in and watch you teach every second of every day that you're teaching. So you have to pick and choose that. Whereas with the dog videos, they're only 30 seconds long, so we can very easily do those continuous intervals, the interval recording. And then topography is just those physical behaviors. So what do we observe? Does the rat always press the lever with a certain paw? Does the, I don't know, so the amount of splash in an Olympic dive, right? Ideally, they have no splash or very little splash. You know. So what does that behavior look like? Can you write neatly? Do you brush your teeth properly, right? So these are some examples that are in your book here. How do you train an animal to do something? So, you know, I don't know that we talked about it. I think very briefly, and we talked about stringing behaviors together, right? So teaching a monkey to ride a bicycle. First, you're going to reward that animal for touching the bicycle. Then you're going to reward that animal for sitting on the bicycle. And then, you know, slowly you remove those reinforcers and only reinforce that behavior that we're looking for. So getting closer and closer, these successive approximations to the behavior that we want to ultimately see that animal perform. So those physical forms of that behavior is what we're talking about with topography. We can also record the number of errors. Yeah, that's not there. So the number of errors that an animal makes. So if I'm trying to teach you to do something and, you know, it takes you 5 times to get it right versus, you know, the next time I have you go and do that, maybe you get it right in 2 times. So we can talk about the number of errors that you make. So when we talked about Thorndike's puzzle boxes, right, he recorded the amount of time it took for the animal to perform some behavior. But he also looked at those errors, right? What else was that animal doing before he was able to escape? Everyone good so far? Talked about a lot already. Let's see, where is a good stopping point for this material? Okay, we'll definitely get through this section. Okay, so assessing reliability. Reliability and validity is very important when we're measuring behavior. So with reliability, we're trying to determine do we get the same answers over and over and over again when we make this assessment? With validity, we're asking the question is, are we measuring what we intend to measure? With overt behavior, it's often easy to determine that. With some covert behaviors, it can be more challenging to assess validity. So if we're just trying to assess how high can someone jump, right? Taking a measuring tape and having them jump and videotaping that and figuring out where, you know, maybe, you know, how high they could reach, or I don't know, there's a number of ways that we could do that. How high their feet get off the ground, etc. But another way that we need to, we can assess, so that's validity, right? That's kind of easy with these overt behaviors. With reliability, we want to make sure that we're getting the same results over and over. We want our tests to be both valid and reliable. So, you know, if I, so do we get the same answers over and over again? That's what I'm talking about here. And in particular, your book is talking about observer reliability, or inter-rater reliability. That's the same thing, different words for the same thing. So with this, in our particular study, right, we're looking at these behaviors in 5-second intervals. So I would go and code a video and say, oh, you know, yes, I saw it in this section, in this section, in this section, right? In interval 1, 2, 3, whatever, right? Wherever I saw that. And then I would give the same video to someone else who has also been trained on the same ethogram, that behavioral operational definitions that we're looking for, and have them code it. And we would compare our results, right? So did I code it the same way someone else coded? And if so, then we can say, okay, this is looking very reliable, and we don't have to have 2 people code everything, right? We want to make sure that they're on the same page and that we can talk about what we're doing in a very clear way so that we can communicate that to others in the future. So here, right, we see observer A and B coded things in interval 1, 2, and 3. Similarly, in 4 and 5, they were different, right? In interval 4, observer A didn't see that behavior, but observer B did. So maybe we need to see what is going on in interval 4 and 5. Maybe this was some behavior that was very close to the time point between 4 and 5. And so observer A put it in 5, whereas observer B put it in 4, whatever. But we need to figure out what's going on, and then hopefully we can correct that, provide more training or something to our raters so that we can get a better sense of reliability in our measures. So 80% is the standard, but we really do want a higher rate of reliability. About 90% would be fantastic. Let me see where we are here. Okay. I'll start this section. I don't think that we'll have time to finish this section. There's a lot of information in this section. This is kind of the bulk of, so I'm hoping that a lot of what we've covered so far is review for you all. I know at least for a couple of you, if you were in research design last semester, some of that definitely should be review for you, if not most of it. Probably not the interval recording, time sample recording, but a lot of it should be. And then the chapter gets into a little bit more specific details of different types of research design that can be used to study behavior. So with descriptive research, we're just describing what happens. So I did this, well, I started this naturalistic observation study. I ended up stopping it because I don't know, it seemed creepy to me and I didn't like that. But I was interested in children at play. And so I went to a playground and I observed children playing on the playground, right? Well, you can see where parents might not love just a stranger sitting around watching their children play on the playground, right? But that would be a type of naturalistic observation. You go into a situation, you do not change anything specifically, right? Sometimes your behavior alone can change other people's behaviors, but you go and you sit and you just watch and see what happens. So you could do this, sitting on a park bench. You could do this at the mall. If you just go and sit on a bench at the mall and observe people, take notes of what happened in their natural environment. So that's just naturalistic observation. And then we can describe that research. So we're not manipulating anything in particular. We're just recording what is there and talking about what happened. So that's just going to be a type of descriptive research there. Yep. Jane Goodall. Are you guys familiar with Jane Goodall? She studied chimps in the wild. She went and observed their behaviors, right? She kind of assimilated into their group and observed their behaviors, and was one of the first and definitely one of the most detailed accounts of their behavior in wild environments, so not in a zoo or not in captivity. And has really been on the forefront of helping preserve non-human I don't know, chimps, monkeys, right? That's not the word I was looking for. I can't think of it right now. All right. So that's one way. Another thing that we can do is actually perform an experiment. So this is where we are definitely manipulating something. This is where our IVs and DVs come in. Our manipulation variable is our independent variable. We're measuring something, right? Our dependent variable. And experiments can give us a lot of information that naturalistic observations might not tell us. So if we're interested in the effects of, I don't know, wording or, some sort of reinforcement, well, you can't really observe that naturally. So we're going to have to manipulate that. So we would introduce something into the environment or take something out of the environment, change something in the environment, and measure what happens, right? What are those behaviors that follow with that manipulation? We can talk about different group designs here. So with a group design, we are manipulating one or more independent variable. Oftentimes we'll have a control group. So a group that either doesn't get the change or that manipulation, or that that manipulation is set at some particular baseline level for the control group. And then we're going to have the experimental group, the group that got the change, that saw the manipulated independent variable. And it's very important to randomly assign people to either the control group or the experimental group. If we don't randomly assign people, what's some problems if we don't randomly assign people? What could happen?
Is there a possibility of like bias and like just picking and choosing volunteers that are like possibly like connected to the experiment?
Right, exactly. So, if we're interested in something like video game playing, right, and we have people, sign up for either a control group or an experimental group, and in the experimental group, they're tasked with playing more video games than the control group, we might see that people would self-select if they enjoy video games to be in that experimental condition, and if you don't enjoy video games, they might self-select to be in that control group. Well, now our group is biased, exactly as you mentioned, right? We have allowed people to pick what they prefer, and so of course they're going to perform differently if they self-select, right, in that particular instance. So what we want to do is randomly assign people to a particular group, and then hopefully we, in that random assignment, we're hoping to evenly disperse the people who enjoy playing video games and the people who do not enjoy playing video games for this study. So that way we know that enjoyment motivation there isn't what's driving our results. Great, Brittany, thank you. What else do I want to talk about? Factorial designs are not listed here, but this would be if we have multiple independent variables. So maybe I'm going to stick with this video game example. We assign someone to play video games for, an hour a day versus, okay, so not at all versus an hour a day versus 3 hours a day, right? So that would be a type of factorial design. And then we can measure multiple things as well. So you would have multiple independent variables and multiple dependent variables. So that's one way that we could do that. We could look at age, we could look at height, we could look at a variety of different things included with that. We could look at the particular game that they played, right? So not only do you have to play for 0 hours, 1 hour, or what did I say, 3 hours a day, but you have to play different games too. So maybe in the first week, we have you play some war game, I don't know. And in the next week, we have you play like something like Tetris, right? Or a spatial game. Or in the third week, we have you play a platformer game like Super Mario or something like that, right? So do we see differences in the amount of time that you play or and the type of game that you're playing? So that's going to be a factorial design where we have multiple independent variables. So the length of time that you're playing and the type of game that you're playing. So that would be an example of a factorial design. We can also talk about comparative designs. So this is where we're comparing across species. So do dogs behave differently than cats, behave differently than birds, behave differently than people? So in that Thorndike paper that we read, right, he looked at multiple animals. He looked at, what animals did he look at? You guys tell me.
He looked at cats, dogs. I can't think of the other animal.
That's right. So cats and dogs, what else? Anyone get the third one?
Was it birds?
Those birds. Yep.
Was it birds?
Yep.
It was birds. Okay.
Those chicks. Yep. So he compared across these different species, right? And he noted some differences across the species, but he also noted a lot of similarities. So that's what we mean by comparative research. We're looking at just across different species, do we see similarities, do we see differences, etc. Would one training program that worked for dolphins work for birds, right? Well, probably not, right? It just depends on what that training program is. And we do see some similarities and differences there. Okay, so pros and cons, and then I'll probably just stop for today. You know, we can make these causal inferences, right? We can say there's a functional relationship if we use these group designs, comparing one group to another group. But, right, we're going to need a large number of subjects because we're going to have one group of subjects in, let's say, the control group and another group of subjects in the experimental group, or one group of subjects in the birds group and a totally different group of subjects in the dogs group, right? So we need more participants in our study if we're using these group designs. Whereas you could do a within groups design and just use the same people across both conditions. We'll talk about that a little later. We are focusing on an average performance though, and so you have to realize that individual results aren't necessarily going to reflect what happened of the group, right? So this could be an example like, we all know that smoking is bad for your health, but I'm sure someone knows some old person who has smoked a pack a day for, 20 years or something, and they seem just fine. So, those individual results aren't what we're talking about. We are looking at the group performance, so averaging across everyone, looking what happens. And then often we do only get those results at the end of a study. So rather than observing over, these small time points, we are looking at the end, did we see this happen or not? Let's see. Yeah, I think that is where I want to stop it for today. The next section goes on to look at single subject designs. So what we've talked about are just these group designs using different groups for each condition here. But we're going to go on to talk about single subjects and then a couple of specific methods. So here's some specific methods that we can use to track behavior. So again, I don't have an article for you guys to read. Stop sharing this for Thursday. Yeah, Q, you like that? So no article for you guys to read Thursday. Make sure you do read chapter 2 in the textbook though. Since we're not reading an article, you are responsible, you know, obviously always for the chapter material. We'll continue talking about this material on Thursday, and then next week we'll pick up with classical conditioning. Yeah, classical conditioning, and we're going to read about little Albert, how he was mistreated. I'll get those articles posted as soon as I can for that, so you guys can just have a heads up. And remember, we'll have that test on the 29th on chapter 1, 2, and the brain and behavior. And don't forget to complete that quiz on the brain and behavior before class on Thursday. Any questions, thoughts? You guys doing all right?